Okay. So welcome back to Weapons of the Week, Part 3, Normal Exploitation and Normal Resistance. That's Chapter 2. I'm going to do my best to explain this because does get a little more complicated. There's a lot packed into these chapters. So the next thing he says is why these everyday forms of resistance are so powerful, and he says that this is because there are no formal leaders, no manifestos, no dues, no name, and no banner. And I can't actually find it on the page, but I remember he says he uses someone to quote that these forms of resistance are almost unbeatable because you're not really aware of them. They are almost collectively unconscious. They're collectively used against the elite. So he then says, he basically says in a page or two, it's quite detailed, says that in order to understand history, we must understand the everyday forms of resistance. So what he's saying is in history we often do only look at the big revolutions. We don't look at how the peasantry lived their lives. So he says, thus, let's have a look. We must not miss the fact that the action of the peasantry has thus changed or narrowed the policy options available to the state. So what they're saying is, in any change in history, the peasantry do have an impact, because everyone has an impact in that world. So you have to consider what it was that led to these impacts. So again, he sort of says how history is often quite biased because it's written by the intelligentsia using written records that are often largely created by literate officials, and it is simply not well equipped to uncover the silent and anonymous forms of class struggle that typify the peasantry. So someone may come into my room. I'm making a video. He then goes on to talk about resistance as thought and symbol, and to confine the analysis to behaviour alone. So what he talks about next is that resistance is not just looking at behaviour. It's not just looking at it in a response. You have to also look at it, the way it was thought out and the symbols around it. So it says, to confine the analysis to behaviour alone, however, is to miss much of the point. It reduces the explanation of human action to the level one might use to explain how the water buffalo resists its driver, or why the dog steals scraps from the table. And I think this is a useful example because it really shows how, if you're not looking at these the more complex issues, or the fact that we are humans and there's more to it than just resisting because we don't like it. So it then gets even more complex here, and he begins talking about the fact that humans are gifted with intentions and values and purposefulness that condition their acts. So what he's saying is we have a consciousness, and the realm of consciousness gives us a kind of... So then he goes on to say that in order to get this well-rounded understanding of why these forms of resistance come about, we need to study through the ethnographic method. So then he brings in Gramsci and a few other people, and there's quite a lot of theory there. So if you're interested in that, it's page 38 and 39 gets quite complicated there. Do they really have... So he criticises this idea of a false class consciousness, and says that they may very well be aware of the fact they're oppressed. They just don't do anything directly about it. They more do small little actions. So the experience of... then he begins to look at the experience of consciousness of human agents. So again, really pushing forward the idea of why we need ethnography. And he says a second reason for putting the experience of human agents at the centre of the analysis concerns the concept of class itself. It is all very well to identify a collection of individuals who all occupy a comparable position in relation to the means of production, a class in itself. But what if such objective structural determinations find little echo in the consciousness and meaningful activity of those who are thus identified? So what he's saying here is, although you may identify them as the proletariat and this class, what if they don't really feel like they are part of what you're identifying them as? What you really need to do is go down there and see on the personal level what is actually happening. So then he uses some useful ethnographic examples, page 44 if you want to find that, and he uses a criticism of ethnography actually to strengthen the usefulness of ethnography, which makes no sense at first. But what he's saying is, he uses the example of a twitch or a wink. So if someone keeps winking their eye, he says mere observation of the physical act gives no clue as to if it is a wink, what kind of wink it is. And what he says is, by using ethnography and by being down there on the ground and understanding the cultural context, we are able to properly understand something as simple as a wink or a twitch. So this is, initially I took this as a criticism of using ethnography, but what I really think is actually a strength of using a more well-rounded, fully integrated ethnography, which he relates to Clifford Geertz. I won't go into that because that is, again, quite confusing. So he says, in this sense, we concentrate at least as much on the experience of behaviour as on the behaviour itself. So, so by looking at the experience of the behaviour, not just what is actually happening, we are able to better understand why these things came about. And an example of this, he is it doesn't actually give an example of that. So there, hopefully that explained that chapter. This was a lot harder than I thought it would be. So hopefully you enjoyed this, guys, and I really tried my best on this one. And this is normal exploitation, normal resistance, weapons of the weak, everyday forms of resistance. So give us a like if you enjoyed that, and I'll see you in the next one.